Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into a land of frostbitten mornings, smoky longhouses, and the quiet, commanding presence of someone you didn't expect to be in charge. There's a sharp edge to the wind, a lingering scent of burning peat, and somewhere in the dark, the rustle of furs as you roll over on your straw-filled mattress. You're in Viking Age Scandinavia, and while the world outside sings of raids, dragons, and axe-swinging glory, inside, under the turf-roofed calm of your longhouse, someone else is steering the ship. You wake with a grunt, pulling the fur tighter around your shoulders, trying not to let the icy air crawl under your tunic. The sun hasn't risen, because of course it hasn't, and you hear the groan of wooden beams as someone moves near the hearth. It's her. She's already up, tending to the coals, preparing the porridge, and frankly, she's been in charge since before you were born. You're not entirely sure you're even the main character here. It's easy to romanticize the Viking world as one where rugged, bearded warriors rule with iron and fire. But if you actually lived there, your day would begin with the not-so-gentle realization that your home, your household, your clan economy, is all kept afloat by a woman who knows exactly how much hay is left in the barn when the goats last gave milk, and how much will she can trade to the next village. She doesn't need a sword to hold power. She's got a ledger in her head and a pantry you wouldn't dare touch without permission. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are, because I'm always curious how far our sleepy little voyages go. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind hisses gently through the cracks in the wooden walls. You sit up, still groggy, and pull on woolen socks that were woven by her hands, because of course they were. Viking women didn't just weave for fashion. Every thread was part of a survival plan. Blankets, tunics, sails for ships, all spun, dyed, and stitched by her. She knows which plant makes the deepest blue, which wool won't itch, and exactly how much she can barter at the next seasonal gathering. And you? You're just hoping there's still honey in the jar. As you step outside to relieve yourself in the snow, yes, let's not pretend ancient plumbing was glamorous. You glance at the horizon. The fjord glows with the first tinge of light, a reflection off the ice that blinds if you stare too long. Boats are docked, but soon enough, they'll be gone, taking the men and sons with them on whatever seasonal expedition the village council deems heroic. That's when the real work begins for her. With the men away raiding or trading, someone has to run the household like a ship. And by run, we mean plan, manage, repair, feed, and discipline, because the household wasn't just a place to sleep. It was an economic engine. And if you were a Viking woman, you didn't get the luxury of waiting around nervously, clutching pearls. You had to make sure your livestock didn't freeze, your workers didn't slack, and your food stores didn't rot in the cellar. Historical records, what few exist, suggest that Viking women held a surprisingly high degree of autonomy for the time. They could inherit property, initiate divorce, and manage wealth independently. And while the sagas often dramatize male exploits, the presence of powerful women is inescapable, from shield maidens to queens to matriarchs who keep the family's fortunes above water when everything else feels like it's sinking. You head back inside, shivering, and the smell of porridge fills the room. She's spooning it into carved wooden bowls, her sleeves rolled up, her hair pinned with bone clips. She nods at you, but doesn't stop moving. There's a rhythm to her mornings. Light the fire, check the meat stores, listen to who's coughing and who's still in bed too long. She knows everyone's duties and everyone's secrets, probably including yours. And here's the kicker. She's not some exception to the rule. She's the rule. Across Scandinavia, archaeological digs have found evidence of women buried with goods that indicate authority: keys, weights for measuring silver, imported goods, and sometimes weapons. The presence of keys is particularly symbolic. These weren't just keys to chests. They were a kind of badge, often worn on a ring at the waist. They meant control over the home's resources, locked storerooms, and trading stockpiles. If you had the keys, you controlled the economy of your household. It's like being CFO, COO, and head of HR all at once, with a sword, if necessary. Now, historians still argue whether these women had true political power or simply symbolic authority within their own homes. Some suggest their autonomy was limited by the patriarchal structure of Viking law and social norms. But others point to runestones, sagas, and legal codes that acknowledge their roles explicitly. Either way, no one disputes that inside the longhouse, she was the one who made sure the world kept spinning. She gestures for you to eat before it cools. You nod, trying not to slurp, and listen as she starts laying out the day. The cows need their hooves checked. The boy who watches the sheep is slacking again. There's a hole in the roof that's letting in too much snow. She's not complaining. She's prioritizing. Like a ship's captain inspecting the sails, she's looking for the weak spots before a storm hits. And it always hits. Maybe it's a failed crop, a delayed trade ship, or a neighboring feud that's reigniting over boundary stones. She has contingency plans for each. And when someone comes knocking at your door asking for help, or trying to stir up trouble, guess who does the talking? You don't remember the last time she raised her voice, but when she does, it's usually because someone's forgotten how to salt fish properly. That's not a joke. Salted fish gone wrong can doom an entire household through winter. One mistake, and your family is coughing through the snowdrifts, hoping the neighbor will share turnips. Spoiler, they won't. You lean back after the meal, watching her toss a bit of leftover grain to the hens she raised from chicks. Every small action is deliberate. Every item in the home, whether it's a hand-carved spoon or a woven tapestry, reflects the unspoken command that nothing is wasted, nothing is left to chance. It's hard not to respect her. It's harder not to wonder how she remembers it all. And just as you're about to help her lift the water bucket, she's already done it. Because of course she has. You're crouched in the doorway of the longhouse now, the sun just a faint smudge behind snow-thick clouds. The world feels quiet in that distinct Viking way, not silent, but filled with the muffled groan of frozen wood and the distant bleating of hungry sheep. Your breath mists in front of you, but inside, a low amber fire flickers in the hearth and fills the longhouse with the scent of burning peat, old wool, and something meaty boiling in an iron pot. You duck back inside, brushing the snow from your boots with a carved birch stick. It's not just a home in here, it's a command center. And she's the one running it. Every Viking longhouse follows a similar pattern. It's long, narrow, and practical, like a ship turned inside out. The walls are thick with turf and timber, designed to trap heat and push the wind back where it belongs. Down the center, a sunken path runs from end to end, flanked by low benches covered in animal skins and hay-stuffed mattresses. You sleep there, eat there, raise your children there, and, sometimes, die there. Above your head, blackened beams glisten from years of soot. The smoke never really leaves. It just clings to the thatch and your lungs. But amid the controlled chaos of animal hides, storage chests, spinning wheels, and drying herbs, a system emerges. She sits near the fire, not out of comfort, but control. From that central spot, she can oversee everything. If something goes wrong, she's the first to know. If someone needs something, they come to her. And if a stranger walks in unannounced, you better believe she knows what to do with the axe behind the door. The hearth isn't just a place for cooking, it's the heart of the house. It's symbolic and functional, and it belongs to her. In Norse cosmology, the hearth represents life and continuity, a flame that must never die out. And who tends that flame? Not some bearded raider, but the woman who also manages how much wood is left, how many beans are soaked, and which child forgot to finish their chores. You glance around the longhouse, taking in the small but vital signs of her command. A row of hanging cheesecloths strung like ghostly curtains near the rear. Clay jars filled with dried fish and juniper berries. A spindle whirring slowly from where she left it last night. It all feels timeless, familiar even. Like the logistics of a medieval warehouse crossed with the mood of a Pinterest board made entirely of sheep products. She moves with purpose through the house. One moment, she's scooping sour milk into a wooden bucket to feed the pigs. The next, she's explaining to your youngest how to braid nettles into cord. You wonder how she knows so much. And then you remember, she was trained for this. Not just by her mother, but by every season, every blizzard, every failed batch of beer. Her education isn't a scroll. It's etched into her fingers and the way she glances at the sky before deciding whether the cabbage can survive another frost. Mainstream history often paints Viking women as background characters, but in truth, the longhouse was their arena, their ship to steer. And like any good captain, They had their own hierarchy, their own crew. If the family was wealthy enough, there were thralls, enslaved workers doing the dirtiest labor. If not, well, then it was all on her and the kids. You included. Quirkily enough, scholars have found that Viking longhouses often had animal quarters built into one end. Yes, you might share a roof with your cows and goats, separated only by a waist-high partition. Which means, congratulations, you've just spent the night snoring next to a sheep named Ragna. Don't worry, she snores, too. And while you might expect that things inside the longhouse were a bit chaotic, fires, kids, animals, drying fish, the occasional visiting cousin, it was precisely the opposite. There were rules, routines, protocols. She didn't run a cozy hut. She ran an enterprise. The longhouse stored grain and traded wool, hosted feasts, and settled disputes. It was a courtroom, kitchen, school, and startup all at once. You reach for a bundle of flax tucked beside the fire, and she arches an eyebrow. That bundle's already been accounted for. You put it back. Historians still debate whether this domestic authority translated into formal power outside the home. Some argue that while women managed the household, they were excluded from broader political decisions. Others point to regional variations and sagas where women openly advise kings, manipulate alliances, and, in some rare cases, lead settlements. The truth, as usual, likely lives somewhere in between, a spectrum of influence, not a binary. One famous tale from the sagas speaks of Yunin the Deep-Minded, a widowed matriarch who led her family across the sea to settle in Iceland. She not only owned land and commanded respect, but also orchestrated marriages, property divisions, and even her own funeral feast. That's not someone who just did the laundry. As the day unfolds, the longhouse reveals more layers. The chest where she stores fine linen, imported, thank you very much. The jar of honey she guards like it's dragon treasure. And the ledgers carved into her memory, not paper. She knows how many sacks of barley are left, and how many she can spare for ale before the next harvest. And she's not afraid to tell you when your help is more hindrance than help. Lunch is a thick stew served in communal bowls, and you all eat with carved spoons passed down from someone's grandmother. Conversation flows, mostly about livestock, weaving, and that traveling merchant who swears he saw a sea serpent last week. She listens, smiles, and then calmly mentions that your cousin left the barn door open again. She's already sent the dog. As the sun lowers in the sky, and let's be honest, in Scandinavia it never got that high, she starts prepping for evening. A pot of herbs is simmering now, not for food, but to dye wool. A neighbor drops by, asking about a recipe for preserving fish eggs, and she obliges while simultaneously mending a tear in your son's tunic. It's like watching someone juggle knives, but in the most domestic way possible. You think about your own role in all this. Yes, you help chop wood, fix fences, and haul water. But the center of gravity in this longhouse doesn't rotate around you. It's her. She holds it all together, like the keel of a ship you rarely notice, until it cracks. And she knows it, too. Not with arrogance, but certainty. By nightfall, the hearth glows again, and the family gathers close. She's spinning wool, half listening to the children's chatter. You glance at the rafters, where herbs hang drying, and the soft rustle of stored grain fills the silence between words. You realize that this house doesn't just stand on beams and turf. It stands on her routines, her memory, her quiet command. And in that flickering light, with snow whispering against the walls, it becomes clear, the longhouse isn't just her domain. It is her ship. The wind howls outside like a drunk sailor arguing with the moon, but inside the longhouse, it's all business. You wake before the light, roused not by the crow of a rooster, because let's be honest, that rooster got turned into stew last month, but by the distinct, rhythmic clink of iron tools being sorted. She's already up, of course. Has been for hours. If you ever managed to rise before her, it would probably signal the end of the world or, at the very least, the goats escaping again. She stands near the door, her cloak already wrapped around her shoulders, holding a small, worn ledger, not of parchment, but memory. It's market day. That means crossing fields, maybe a frozen stream, and braving a gauntlet of stubborn neighbors and grumpy livestock just to trade for salt, soapstone, and that one spice she claims is essential, even though you're pretty sure it just tastes like dirt. She doesn't carry coin in a purse. Instead, she walks with the authority of someone who knows exactly what her family produced this month and what it's worth. Cloth, cheese, dried fish, and that wooden comb your cousin whittled on a dare. It's all potential currency. You're not heading to some grand Viking mall. Markets here are personal, gritty, and, quite often, political. You trudge alongside her through a slush-laced path, boots squelching in rhythm. The village comes into view, a scatter of turf-roofed homes, smoke rising like tired sighs from each. You recognize the gathering place, a clearing lined with makeshift stalls, barrels turned tables, and a few suspiciously greasy dogs loitering near a fishmonger. She walks straight to a woman selling soapstone bowls, no hesitation, and begins negotiating like she's trading livestock futures. You try to follow along, but the bartering sounds more like a saga than a sale. Viking women like her didn't just trade, they curated household economies. Every transaction, every deal was calculated. You see, she's not just thinking about today. She's anticipating 6 months from now when dried berries run out or the cheese mold starts whispering ancient curses. She knows what to risk, what to hold, and what to walk away from. Which she does. Twice. Dramatically. And then she gets what she wants, not just bowls, but a tiny silver pendant in the shape of Thor's hammer. A gift, maybe, or a down payment for good fortune. Jewelry wasn't just decoration. It was wealth. A portable savings account hanging from her neck or stitched into her clothing. Historians still argue whether Viking women had full legal control over such items, but archaeological digs show plenty of female graves with keys, brooches, and hoards of valuables, like they weren't just part of the household but running the treasury. The keys, in particular, are important. She wears hers at her belt, small, iron, and unmistakable. Not for show. They unlock the family's storage chests. Food, fabric, maybe a hidden stash of mead she tells no one about. To lose those keys would be like losing control of the ship. And no, she's not about to let that happen. Now you're watching her engage in a conversation about will die. Apparently, there's been a fiasco with some onion skins. This spirals into a full-blown gossip circle involving someone's cousin's sheep and a questionable romance with a traveling bard. You're trying to act like you're not listening, but come on, this is gold. Community is built in these moments, not during feasts or in sagas, but over cold hands, steaming breath, and a shared disdain for brackish beer. She finishes the trade with a nod, slides a new length of cloth into her bag, and moves on. You follow, still half listening to the bard sheep saga in the background. Viking markets weren't just for women, but you notice there are a lot of them here. Selling, haggling, arguing about spindle ratios and fermented turnip prices. This isn't some dainty women's work kind of thing. It's raw, vital survival. And she's good at it. Better than most. A quirky discovery from a recent dig in Burka, a Viking-age trading hub, showed evidence that a buried female skeleton might have been a high-ranking warrior, complete with weapons and game pieces. Some experts remain skeptical, debating if the body was misidentified, if the gear was ceremonial, or if Viking society had more fluid gender roles than previously thought. But even if that specific case remains debated, there's little doubt that women wielded economic and cultural clout far beyond the hearth. Your feet are soaked. Your fingers are numb. She's on her third trade and hasn't even blinked. She picks up a packet of dried herbs and eyes you sideways. You're carrying the soapstone, she says. No argument. No explanation. Just command. You take it and realize, once again, how much of this world rests on her balance, quite literally. One wrong trade, one sick goat, one cracked bowl, and the whole ship starts listing. But under her watch, it holds steady. There's a moment, quiet, warm, in which she accepts a small piece of smoked fish from another woman, offers back a wedge of cheese, and they both laugh at something you don't quite catch. It's not just trade. It's trust. A bartering system held together by memory, reputation, and the mutual understanding that winter doesn't care if you haggled well, it only cares if you're ready. On the way home, she walks faster than you'd expect, given the weight of the goods. She never complains. Just keeps moving, cloak billowing behind her like a sail on an inland sea. You struggle to keep up, not because she's sprinting, but because her stride is so resolute. She knows where she's going. Always. Back inside the longhouse, she checks each traded item, placing them with care in their respective places. Nothing is wasted. Even the cloth wrapping gets folded and saved. She takes a moment to stoke the fire, murmurs something under her breath that might be a prayer or just a shopping list, and then finally, sits down. The house exhales around her. You realize, in that stillness, that she didn't just trade goods today. She reinforced alliances, tracked gossip, assessed threats, and calculated survival odds in a time when one bad season could sink the whole family. She looks over at you and smirks. Not bad for market day, she says. And you, soaked, cold, and carrying an awkwardly shaped bowl, can't help but agree. She didn't just steer the ship. Today, she expanded the fleet. You're up before the light again. Not because you want to be, but because she is. There's a quiet sort of determination humming through the house this morning, the kind that makes you sit up and pay attention, even if your blanket is warm and your toes are not. The coals in the hearth are still glowing faintly. She's already tending them, coaxing flame like she's bargaining with the spirit of fire itself. You swear she could start a blaze with a dirty look if she had to. Today isn't market day. It's something more sacred, something woven into the long roots of this household. You see, it's wash day. Now, before you roll your eyes and imagine a pile of socks, remember this isn't just a chore. For a Viking woman, wash day was a full-scale production. And, frankly, it was war. Against stains, against smells, and against the impossible odds of keeping anything clean when everyone's favorite pastime involves rolling in the mud or splashing through salty sea air. She starts with the cauldron. It's heavy and blackened from use, sitting over the fire like a fat iron sentinel. You help haul water from the well, your hands going numb with each bucket. She adds a handful of ashes, not randomly, but precisely measured. Ash lie, she tells you, lifts the dirt and breaks the grease. You're skeptical, but then again, she once cured your cousin's infected toe with moldy bread and honey, so maybe you don't know as much as you think. She stirs the mixture with a long stick, careful not to splash. The steam rises thick and tangy. A nearby cat gives it a sniff and retreats with great offense. Good call. Laundry, in the Viking Age, wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a statement. Imagine walking into a gathering wearing a tunic crusted with fish scales and old porridge. People would talk. They still might give you stew, but they'd definitely whisper. So keeping garments presentable was, quite literally, keeping your family's reputation intact. You help her rub cloth against a smooth stone, cold, worn down from years of service. The rhythm is hypnotic. Dunk, wring, scrub. It's easy to forget the world outside when your focus narrows to a single stubborn patch of dirt on a woolen sleeve. She hums as she works. It's not a song you recognize, but something old, perhaps passed down from her mother, and her mother before that. A song for strength. For suds. Did you know? Archaeologists have uncovered early evidence that Viking women may have used fermented urine. Yes, you heard that right, as a powerful cleaning agent. It contains ammonia, which, as gross as it sounds, cuts through grease like a dream. She doesn't use it today, but she mentions it with a grin, clearly amused at your expression of horror. She's not just scrubbing garments. She's inspecting them. A rip here, a fray there, each thread tells a story. And Viking women were masters of repair. A well-mended tunic wasn't a sign of poverty, but proof of diligence. She fetches her bone needle and sinew thread, darning a tear so seamlessly it disappears into the cloth. Historians still debate whether Viking women worked in dedicated weaving rooms or multi-use spaces, but textile work was without question central to their identity. And not just for making new clothes, preserving the old was just as vital. By midday, the clean laundry is laid across a rack outside, steam rising like breath from each dripping hem. The breeze is icy, but dry, and that's what matters. She stands with her hands on her hips, watching like a captain surveying freshly mended sails. You half expect her to salute the drying tunics. The longhouse isn't just where she works. It's her domain. And within its walls, maintenance is sacred. You start to notice the tiny rituals, how she folds each cloth the same way, how she stores soap root in a particular pouch, how every tool has its place. This isn't obsession, it's strategy. A well-run home is a well-oiled ship, and every stitch, every drop of lye, keeps the storm at bay. Later, she kneels by the hearth again. Not to clean this time, but to offer thanks. A bowl of broth for the ancestors. A whisper to the gods of warmth and flame. Viking spirituality was woven through daily life like threads in linen. There were no grand temples here, but every fire, every humble offering, was a prayer. The gods didn't need gold. They needed discipline, care, and a household that thrived despite the odds. You sit beside her, catching your breath. Your hands are raw, your back sore. But you've learned something unexpected. That labor, even the mundane kind, can be noble. That scrubbing wool in the cold with blistered fingers might just be a form of love. A stubborn, steamy, scented love. She pours hot water into a carved wooden basin and washes her face. Then yours. You flinch at the heat, but say nothing. This is tradition. A closing gesture, like sealing a letter or tying off a sail. The work is done. The house is cleaner. The ship is sound. Outside, a raven circles and caws. She looks up and mutters, watchful eyes today. Ravens, as you might know, were seen as messengers of Odin, god of war and wisdom. She doesn't shoo it away. She just nods, like they've got a silent understanding. You return indoors, the sin of ash still clinging to your sleeves. She begins sorting tomorrow's work quietly, efficiently. Because in a world like this, every day is preparation for the next. There is no off-season, no retirement, only winter, and those clever enough to outlast it. She doesn't need applause or ceremony. Just a warm fire, a dry tunic, and maybe, if the gods are kind, a cup of mead before bed. You think again about how people talk of Viking raids and ships and battles. All very exciting, very manly. But no one ever writes a saga about the woman who fought mildew and won. Maybe they should. Maybe this is the real battle, fought daily, with soap and sinew, by someone who never once considered quitting. And with that, she starts knitting. You wake to the creak of the longhouse roof, wind scratching at the beams like it's trying to eavesdrop. Inside, the world smells of smoke, wool, and something tangy, fermented maybe, or just well-aged goat. She's already moving again, of course. If you haven't figured it out by now, she doesn't sleep late. She doesn't have time for it. Today, she's not cleaning or trading or sewing. Today is about food, not the eating part, the planning part. Because here, food isn't just survival. It's foresight. And she doesn't just cook meals, she engineers them. You shuffle to her side as she kneels near a chest embedded in the packed earth floor. It creaks open, revealing its treasure. Smoked meats wrapped in cloth, dried fish strung in neat loops, jars of pickled roots stacked with obsessive precision. Each item represents labor done weeks or months before, salt rubbed in, herbs gathered, meat hung carefully above smoke until it took on the texture of old leather and the scent of a campfire. Winter has its own kind of math, and she's doing it now with her eyes. How many mouths to feed? How many days left before the snow softens? How much to save in case of unexpected guests or surprise disasters? You try to count along and fail by the second row of dried apples. Most Viking homes didn't have separate kitchens. Cooking happened right here, at the hearth, the beating heart of the household. She stirs the embers, places a heavy iron pot on the hook above it, and adds water from a leather bucket. From there, the ritual begins. Roots, herbs, bits of preserved meat, a sprinkle of last summer's salt. It's a dance she knows by heart. And you get the glamorous job, grating dried turnips with a bone rasp until your knuckles nearly bleed. She watches but doesn't interfere. You suspect she wants to see if you'll complain. You don't. You're learning. The broth starts to bubble, steam curling around the rafters like sleepy ghosts. She adds a pinch of something from a tightly sealed pouch. It smells like earth and sharp citrus. You ask what it is. She just says, flavor. You don't press. Some things are family secrets, passed down like blood. Did you know? Vikings had access to a surprisingly diverse diet. Grains, dairy, meats, even imported spices if they lived near a trade route. Quirky finds in preserved Viking toilets. Yes, they studied that. Have shown traces of dill, cumin, and even black pepper. Historians still argue whether these were everyday ingredients or rare luxuries. Either way, she's clearly not one to settle for bland. While the stew simmers, she sets out to check the cheese. It's aging in the coolest part of the house, wrapped in cloth, marked with symbols only she understands. Each wheel is a risk. Too much damp and it rots. Too dry and it cracks. But today they look good. She hums again. You take that as a good sign. Then she moves to the barrels, fermented vegetables in one, fish in another, and a third you're fairly certain is just pickled mystery. She dips in a carved spoon and hands it to you. It's sharp, tangy, and oddly sweet. You wince. She laughs. Food isn't just sustenance. It's a message that the house is strong, the woman in charge is clever, and the gods have not turned their faces away. Every meal is a reassurance to the family that they will see spring again. Maybe that's why she never rushes. Each step, each tasting, each sealed jar, it's all part of the larger story she's writing with ingredients instead of ink. You notice a bundle of herbs hanging from the beams, dried yarrow, angelica, and something that smells faintly minty. Not just for seasoning, She explains. For healing, too. Viking women were often the keepers of medicinal knowledge. A cut treated with pine resin, a fever soothed with willow bark, a difficult birth aided by caraway tea. She knows it all. You get the feeling she'd stitch your wound shut while humming and asking you to pass the butter. Out of nowhere, there's a knock at the door. She doesn't flinch. She grabs a wooden spoon, her weapon of choice, and cracks it open. It's a neighbor, holding a bruised boy and a broken jar. You barely understand the situation before she's in motion. Herbs fetched, bandage cut, stew ladled into a spare bowl. Hospitality isn't optional. It's custom. If someone arrives hungry or hurting, you feed and you fix. Then you ask questions. She treats the boy's scrape with a paste made from mashed garlic and honey, strong enough to sting, but safer than letting it fester. Garlic, she tells you, wards off more than just hunger. You nod like you knew that already. The neighbor thanks her, bows his head, and leaves with a sheepish look. She watches him go, then mutters something about how if people stopped wrestling near the drying racks, they'd break fewer jars. You snort. She grins. You help her spoon stew into clay bowls. No table, no silverware. Just laps and fingers and thick chunks of root veg so soft they melt on your tongue. It's simple but hearty, and so good you briefly wonder if it's actually magic. Later, after everything's put away and the fire's banked low, she gives you a scrap of bread with a smear of that sharp, tangy preserve. Try this, she says. You do. It tastes like something between courage and vinegar. You ask her if she ever gets tired. She shrugs. There's always more food to make. That might sound like exhaustion, but from her, it's something else. A mission. A quiet defiance of the cold, the dark, the hunger always crouching outside the door. She doesn't lead armies. She doesn't sail west in search of gold. But she makes sure everyone else can. Remember that fire earlier? How it just needed coaxing. That's her. Quiet, steady, vital. You fall asleep to the sound of her sharpening her knife. The day begins with a sharp clang and a muted groan. Yours, mostly. You're rubbing your eyes as she hoists a heavy iron pan from its hook, arms steady like they're carved from shipwood. Her sleeves are rolled, her eyes focused. The house hums with quiet purpose, and there's a peculiar tension in the air. Something's happening. Not a festival, not a raid. Something domestic, but just as political. She's preparing to host. Now, you might think hosting is as simple as laying out some food and brushing the crumbs off a bench. But in a Viking household, hospitality is a high art form, carefully calibrated, threaded with layers of unspoken codes and reputation management. You don't just welcome someone in. You curate the experience like you're setting the stage for a very rustic, very smoky Michelin star meal with bone spoons. The guests are relatives from the next fjord. Technically family, but you can already tell she's not thrilled. They bring gossip, side eyes, and that uncle who always finds a way to hint that her pickled eggs are a little soft this year. So she prepares like a general. Everything must look effortless, even if it means wrestling chaos into submission with a serving spoon. She starts by laying out the best linens. These aren't just rags. They're hand-woven, dyed with lichen and onion skin, and embroidered at the edges with patterns that might double as family sigils. She smooths them with her palm like a queen inspecting a treaty. Each item on the table is placed just so, the carved drinking horns arranged by size, the salt dish centered perfectly, the slabs of cheese presented at slightly boastful angles. Did you know? Viking women often kept the family's keys on a chain at their waist, sometimes intricately decorated. It wasn't just practical, it symbolized power. She's wearing hers now, and the way they jingle when she walks is less accessory and more authority alarm. While you help sweep up fallen pine needles and rogue onion skins, she slices bread into thick wedges and checks the meat. It's cloudy, golden, and strong enough to knock out a bear with a sinus infection. She lets it breathe near the hearth. Not for flavor, for effect. It says, yes, we ferment. And we ferment well. As you chop more root vegetables than should reasonably exist, she shares a sly grin. If the food's good enough, they'll forget to complain. You get the feeling this is both strategy and revenge. By mid-morning, you're tasked with heating the hand-washing basin. Guests, even ones you secretly hope slip on the front step, must be received with dignity. She hands you a cloth soaked in something that smells like juniper and ash. Wipe the bench. Not like last time. Okay, ouch. Outside, The guests arrive with all the enthusiasm of people hoping to find fault in your thatch work. She greets them with a smile honed like a knife edge. There's a peck on the cheek, a nod at the weather, and then, business as usual. Coats off, shoes near the door. You catch her glancing at the rug. You swept it. Mostly. Mealtime is theater. She serves in a pattern you realize mimics status, family hierarchy, and subtle politics. Uncle talk too much gets the ladle second, not first. Aunt whispers at night gets an extra slice of sausage. The little cousin gets stew with extra turnips. Every choice is deliberate. While everyone eats, she weaves herself in and out of conversation like a ship through ice. She knows who argued last winter over goats, who's secretly short on grain, and who might be angling for a marriage proposal by spring. Viking households weren't isolated. They were knots in a vast social net. And she's got both the map and the scissors. You overhear her gently correcting a cousin who says something wildly wrong about harvest moons. She does it with a laugh, a poured drink, and a reminder about that one time the cousin forgot to salt her fish. Everyone chuckles. The power shift is clean, quiet, effective. Hospitality, you see, is more than food and fire. It's a show of competence. She's not just feeding mouths. She's reaffirming her standing, maintaining alliances, and subtly reminding everyone that her household runs as tight as a ship on stormy seas. Quirky fact incoming. Some Viking women, especially wealthy ones, may have brewed and distributed mead as a profession. Imagine a brewing matriarch with her own loyal following. Historians still debate how formal these roles were, but some graves include brewing tools alongside the usual jewelry and beads. Speaking of jewelry, one guest mentions her brooches. Big, brass, and beautifully carved. She gives a modest, "Oh, this old thing" shrug, but you know those are heirlooms, passed down, polished daily, and meant to gleam just right in firelight. They say, "We're fine. We've always been fine, even when the storms came." Later, she hands out bundles, leftover bread, dried herbs, a sliver of salted fish wrapped in cloth. Not charity, reciprocity. A Viking woman keeps the scales of gifting balanced like a saga poet remembers verses. A little here, a little there. Everyone owes. Everyone repays. That's how villages survive, even when the gods get moody. As the guests leave, she watches them go with a look you recognize, satisfaction layered over pure exhaustion. The longhouse is warm again, quiet, and just slightly more cluttered with footprints and empty bowls. She doesn't sit yet. She never does right away. Instead, she picks up a dish and begins washing it. One by one, with practiced grace, she restores the space to order. You join her, trying not to break anything. She doesn't thank you, but she doesn't correct you either. Progress. She finishes the last bowl and finally sighs. A long one, like letting out the sail on a calm sea. You ask if it went well? She shrugs. No one cried. No one fought. And the mead didn't run out. In Viking terms, that's basically a 5-star Yelp review. She moves to her corner, curls her legs beneath her, and begins spinning wool from a spindle. You watch the fibers twist like tiny braids, forming thread with infinite patience. The same kind of patience it takes to hold a household together, season after season, with nothing but dried fish, family feuds, and the occasional fermenting mystery. Outside, the wind howls again. But inside, she hums. You wake to a silence that isn't empty, it's loaded. Thick with tension, like the long pause before thunder. She's already moving, of course, but not with the usual rhythm. Her steps are brisker, her voice lower, her movements clipped. Something is wrong. You're not sure what yet, but it's humming beneath the floor like trapped bees. She's checking the storage again, but not in the calm, methodical way she did before. This is faster. She yanks open chests, counts bundles by touch, rattles jars to gauge their weight. You finally ask what's happening, and she answers with 2 words that make your stomach twist. Weevils. Again. You probably thought Viking hardship meant raids and blizzards. Sometimes, it's insects. And this year, the pantry's under siege from the tiniest kind of enemy. Viking women, like her, had to be endlessly vigilant. One lapse in judgment, one missed crack in a barrel lid, and months of effort can vanish into the mouths of squirming grainworms. There's no grocery store to fall back on, no last-minute trip for oats. This is it. What they've stored is all they have. She lifts a linen sack. Inside, the barley is crawling, infested, moving like something alive. She sighs, not in defeat, but in deep, irritated calculation. You think she's about to throw it out, but no. She starts sorting through it, flicking bugs into the fire, like she's flicking away bad dreams. Did you know? Viking households used herbs like tansy and wormwood not just for seasoning, but to repel pests. Historians still argue whether storing grain with herbs was science or superstition. She seems to believe in both. She sprinkles a sharp-smelling powder into the remaining sacks. You ask what it is. Birch ash and mint, she says, not looking up. Keeps most things out. Except the gods. And gossip. You try not to smile. She doesn't. You offer to help, and she hands you a sieve made from horsehair and bone. Your job is to sift the salvageable grains from the powdery, infested mess. It takes hours, your back aches, your eyes blur. She doesn't stop. And neither do you. Later, she decides which jars must be opened and resealed, which cheeses must be rewrapped, which meats need to be moved closer to the hearth's dry heat. It's triage, like a battlefield, but the weapons are ladles and lint. Then comes the decision-making. What a ration. What a risk. What a let go. She gathers the family by the hearth. Her words are calm, but firm. Meals will be smaller for a while. No second helpings. No waste. If the spring trade goes well, they'll be fine. If not, they'll still be fine, but leaner. You glance around at the others. No one argues. Because when she speaks like that, people listen. She's the one who knows the pantry's heartbeat, who remembers how many eggs each hen laid, who keeps a mental log of everything that's ever been pickled. Quirky fact, some Viking women kept household ledgers by knotting cords or carving tallies into wood. Primitive bookkeeping, but efficient. She doesn't write anything down. She doesn't need to. As the house settles into this new routine, you notice subtle changes. Meals arrive slower. Bowls look a bit emptier. But no one seems scared. Because she's there. Quietly measuring, stirring, storing. Controlling what can be controlled. And then, just as you think the day is done, she says, let's bait the traps. You blink. For what? She gives you a look. Mice. Of course. So you follow her outside, where she sets small wooden snares near the barn. She rubs the bait on a rock cheese, soaked in something that smells like despair, and places it with surgical precision. You ask if it always works. She shrugs. Usually. Unless they're smarter this year. You'd laugh, but you've already seen weevils when around. Back inside, she mixes a batch of vinegar infused with pine needles and garlic. Not for food. For cleaning. She scrubs down the pantry walls like she's exorcising spirits. The scent is sharp, bracing, a declaration of war against decay. Later, when the fire's low and the others have dozed off, you find her mending a cloth bag with meticulous stitches. You sit beside her, not saying anything, just watching the thread dance through fabric. She tells you, quietly, that this isn't the first infestation, or the worst. One winter, years ago, the dried fish went sour, and they survived on broth and turnip peel stew. Another year, a rat chewed through the cheese store, and they had to barter with neighbors using beads and wool. She doesn't talk like a victim. She talks like a captain reviewing weather logs. You realize then, the strength isn't in her hands, though they're strong. It's not in her knowledge, though it's vast. It's in her refusal to panic. Her ability to pivot. To handle whatever arrives, no matter how small, no matter how squirmy. Outside, the wind's picking up again. A storm's whisper, not quite a promise. But inside, she's wiping her hands on her apron, tying the grain sacks tight, checking the door latches twice. The hearth glows. The house breathes. And you? You sleep a little easier. Because you know she's not just running the household like a ship. She's defending it like a fortress. You don't hear the knock at first. It's the kind of tap that barely stirs the air. But she does. She always does. Before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes. She's up, shawl draped across her shoulders. Keys jangling at her hip like wind chimes made of brass and warning. The longhouse creaks as she moves. Her footsteps are precise, even softer than usual. When she lifts the heavy wooden latch and opens the door, you see it. A cloaked figure, hunched, wet from the rain, and clutching something bundled in cloth. A neighbor, but not one you recognize. You step forward instinctively, and she gives you a glance that says, wait. Not because she's afraid, but because assessing a situation is her first language. She speaks it fluently, without ever needing to raise her voice. It's a woman from upriver. Younger, eyes sunken, carrying a newborn. The bundle shifts, lets out a whimper. She's asking for help. Shelter. maybe more. Now, here's something most people get wrong about Viking life. They picture endless brawls, cold stares, and a community that tosses out the weak. But in reality, survival depended on interdependence. Reputation wasn't just about wealth or war. It was about generosity. About how you responded when someone showed up soaked and shaking, asking for fire. Still, this is no small request. Every extra mouth is a calculation. And yet, without hesitation, she waves them in. Sit near the hearth, she says, already pulling out a spare woolen wrap. You're dripping like a fish out of water. That's not sympathy in her voice. That's command. She's already shifting furniture, adjusting the pot so it doesn't boil too fast, setting out a mug and filling it with the last of the nettle tea. The younger woman hesitates, unsure whether to speak or cry. So she does both. Turns out, there was a fire. A chimney collapse. Half her house is gone. The rest is ash. Her husband? Off at sea. No one's seen the crew in weeks. She's been walking for hours. She listens, nodding only once, then gets up and starts rearranging the sleeping space like this was always the plan. You offer to help. She hands you an extra blanket. Warm the stones first, she says, meaning the ones you'll tuck around the bedding to trap heat. Viking hospitality wasn't just warm beds and hearty stews. It was also protection. Responsibility. She's not just offering space. She's offering status. Shelter under her roof means something, especially for a woman alone. Did you know? Some Viking sagas mention fosterage, not just among relatives, but between households. Raising another family's child was a mark of honor and alliance. Historians still debate how formal these arrangements were, but they weren't uncommon. While the young mother sleeps, she whispers to you, "I'll speak to the others. We'll stretch the rations." Then, almost as an afterthought, she adds, "If that sea husband of hers is gone for good, we'll figure something out." You wonder how often she's done this, taken people in, rearranged the already tight pieces of her daily puzzle to make room for one more. You get the sense it's not rare. By mid-morning, she's out back chopping extra kindling. You try to take the axe from her, but she frowns. "This is the dry wood. I know the knot lines." You don't. You step aside. Inside, the new guest is stirring. She's hungry, dazed, still wrapped in that shocked silence that follows ruin. But she eats. Slowly, gratefully. You watch as she notices the things you've stopped noticing. The way the hearth always burns evenly, the little stack of rushes by the door, the smell of sage drying near the rafters. It's stability. And it's hers now, for as long as she needs it. Quirky aside, there's evidence Viking women sometimes adopted roles as community mediators. If a dispute arose, land, inheritance, whose goat chewed whose fence, it wasn't always the men who settled it. In some households, she was the final word. Historians still argue how common this was, but graves of high-status women suggest authority wasn't rare. It just looked different. That night, she sits beside her guest. They don't talk much. They don't need to. She pulls out her spindle again, twisting flax into thread, her foot tapping in time. She hums a song you recognize from weeks ago, something low and soothing, like waves brushing a rocky shore. The baby stirs, then stills. You notice she's placed the guest near her own bedding area. A quiet gesture, but one with weight. This isn't charity. It's inclusion. She leans toward you later and says, "Tomorrow, we'll see if her roof can be mended. There's always leftover timber in the barn." You blink. You're helping rebuild it? She shrugs. She's still got roots. Might as well water them. You want to ask, when do you rest? When do you stop carrying everyone else? But the look on her face tells you the answer. She doesn't think of it as burden. She thinks of it as ballast. That quiet weight beneath the ship's hull that keeps everything from tipping, even in the roughest waters. And for all her muttered curses, her aching hands, her careful rationing, this is what she's built herself for. Not just running a household, but keeping the entire village from drifting too far from shore. You wake earlier than usual, the kind of morning where the light barely filters through the roof thatch and the coals are still breathing low in the hearth. She's already up. Of course she is. You never catch her off guard. Not really. She's a storm ahead of the weather, a plan before the need. But today, there's something different in her focus. Her hands are busy, yes, but not with the usual domestic cadence. No, she's gathering cloth bundles and knotting strings with a purposeful speed, checking lists in her head. The market day is coming. And not just any market day, spring's first real trading gathering, where boats from neighboring fjords crowd the dock like seagulls after a fish gut, and every family tries to out-bargain, out-sparkle, out-charm the others. It's commerce, sure, but for her, it's chess. War, without bloodshed. She looks at you. Eyes sharp but not unkind. You'll help today, she says, and you're not quite sure if it's a request or a destiny. So, you follow her through the inventory. Cloth bundles of spun wool, dyed in faded yellows and seaweed greens. Bone needles wrapped in braided cords. A few precious combs carved from antler. Not a merchant's hoard, but enough to trade smart. Only show the best pieces first if their boots are clean, she mutters as she rolls a band of dyed fabric. You raise an eyebrow, and she smirks. Good boots, good coin. Muddy boots, muddy promises. Did you know? Viking trade routes stretched from Newfoundland to Baghdad. Their market economy was a blend of the familiar and the exotic. Historians still argue whether household women like her directly managed bartering trips. But let's be honest, who else knew what the family could afford to part with? The trek to market takes time. The path's muddy, riddled with boot-swallowing divots. She walks with the practiced sway of someone balancing 3 baskets and 5 responsibilities. You carry the lighter load, and she doesn't comment, but you can feel the unspoken nudge. Keep up. When you arrive, the market is already a controlled storm. Tents flutter. Fish stink. Voices boom and barter like the crashing of pots. She doesn't flinch. She dives in. You trail behind her through tight rows of stalls. She moves like a hawk, pausing, weighing, scanning cloth and beads, and the odd iron blade. She doesn't buy yet. She's gauging. You realize this entire first pass is reconnaissance. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking women wore keys on their belts, literal symbols of authority. It wasn't just about unlocking doors. It was about owning access to storage, to wealth, to power. She wears 3. You've seen her use all of them. Finally, she stops. A vendor with a crooked grin is selling salt blocks wrapped in waxy hide. You almost miss the trade. It happens so fast. She swaps 2 combs and a bone pin for a modest chunk, then tucks it into her satchel without ceremony. Salt means preservation. Preservation means survival. This was a calculated strike. You notice the way the men speak to her. Not with surprise, but with guarded respect. They know her, not just as a presence, but as a competitor. She doesn't haggle to save a coin. She haggles because this is a game, and she plays to win. She trades a bundle of wool for a spindle carved with runes. Later, she trades that spindle for a smoked goose. The goose? She parts with it only after a long stare at a leatherworker who finally throws in a pouch of dried lingonberries and a set of new boot straps. Barter math, she mutters. Same as kitchen math, just more feathers. You spot a younger merchant trying to overcharge her for soapstone beads. He's smiling too wide, puffed up like a rooster. You think she's going to scold him. Instead, she starts telling a story about a cousin who traded a silver armband for fake amber and ended up with a rash that looked like dragon scales. You're not sure if it's true, but it's vivid enough to rattle the boy. She walks away with the beads for half price. Historians still debate how much formal authority Viking women had in law and trade. But these women, these merchant mothers, these household commanders, they didn't need titles. They had leverage. They knew secrets. And they never forgot a debt. Back at the longhouse, she unpacks everything slowly, like unfolding a map. Each item has its place. Each trade, a consequence. The salt goes straight to the storage room. The beads, gifts maybe. Or perhaps, currency in another deal down the line. She places the boot straps near the hearth for repair work tomorrow. Then looks at you. Well, she asks. What did you learn? You fumble for something clever, but she's already turned, wrapping the leftover cloth back into its original shape. You think she's done for the day. She's not. She pulls out a wooden box. Inside, items not for trade. Trinkets, bones, a carved whale tooth, a tiny iron bell, and a small brooch that's seen too many winters. She studies it like it might change its mind. These aren't goods, she says softly. They're stories. You nod, not because you understand, but because you will. That night, she eats slowly, thoughtfully. The baby from the guest sleeps nearby. The room is quiet, filled with the warm clink of wooden bowls and the slow crackle of embers. She doesn't brag, doesn't list what she brought home, but the pantry feels fuller. The roof seems stronger. The silence safer. And you? You finally understand why they call her a household head. Because it's not just about running a home. It's about steering a future. You wake to the sharp crack of frost creeping across the window panes. The chill bites through the walls like a restless ghost. Yet she is already at the hearth, fingers expertly coaxing the fire back to life. The longhouse smells faintly of smoked fish and pine resin, the scent wrapping around you like a familiar cloak. Today, the focus is different. Today, she's planning for winter. Winter in the Viking world isn't just a season. It's a trial, a slow siege that tests every bit of grit and foresight a household can muster. Food must be preserved, fires kept alive, water stored before the frost seals the wells. The household economy tightens, demands sharpen. And she, the commander of this microcosm, prepares for the long, dark months ahead. You watch as she pulls out a wooden box filled with seeds, turnips, barley, peas, carefully cataloged and counted. Seeds are precious, like tiny time capsules of survival. She handles each one with reverence, like a mother tending to her offspring. Plant them too early, she says, and the frost will claim your work. Plant too late, and you starve before spring. Did you know? Archaeological digs have uncovered Viking seed packets stored alongside household tools, proving that women often managed the planting and harvesting schedules. Historians still debate the extent to which women controlled agricultural decisions versus male landowners, but evidence leans toward a shared responsibility, one where women's roles were crucial and respected. She moves to the pantry next, assessing dried fish hung on hooks, bags of salted pork, and barrels of pickled cabbage. Each item is meticulously checked. Spoiled food could mean sickness or starvation. Good food means life. She marks barrels with charcoal, dates the batches, and instructs you on the importance of rotating stocks. You don't want to eat last year's fish when this year's is fresh, she warns. Rotating food stores is like rotating troops. You keep the strongest up front. The task isn't glamorous. It involves meticulous planning, back-breaking work, and endless vigilance. But she makes it look effortless, like a dance practiced through years of trial and error. You follow her outside where she inspects the root cellar. It's a cool, dark cave lined with stones and lined with straw. She explains how the cellar's temperature stays constant, cold enough to keep vegetables dormant, but warm enough to prevent freezing. This balance is vital. Too cold, and everything spoils. Too warm, and mold takes hold. Quirky fact: some Viking homes had hidden compartments beneath floors or benches where valuables and food were stashed in emergencies. One archaeologist found a stash of preserved apples buried under a floorboard, likely a secret cache kept by a woman who feared a raiding party. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was, but it shows the ingenuity of Viking women in crisis. She lights a lantern and leads you inside. The faint glow reveals rows of root vegetables, bags of grains, and jars of dried herbs. She talks about preserving not just food but also family traditions, recipes passed down through generations, herbal remedies for winter illnesses, and prayers whispered to keep the hearth spirit happy. You feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The household depends on her wisdom now more than ever. Every decision she makes could mean comfort or hardship in the cold months ahead. As dusk falls, she stitches new patches onto worn clothing, muttering about mending socks and reinforcing cloaks. If your clothes don't hold the cold, nothing else matters, she says. Her hands work quickly, guided by muscle memory and years of necessity. You think about how different life must have been for women in other parts of the world, where winter's grip isn't as fierce. Here, the cold shapes everything: food, clothing, daily routines, even social structures. She pauses to tell you a story about a winter so harsh that many families lost livestock and food stores, forcing them to band together in mutual aid. That's the other side of winter, she says. It's hard, but it teaches us to lean on each other. You notice how she rarely speaks about hardship without threading in hope and resilience. Finally, she prepares a simple meal: stew with preserved vegetables and salted meat. The aroma fills the longhouse, warm and inviting. She invites you to eat, and for a moment, the cold outside feels distant. You realize that running a Viking household is not just about power or status. It's about nurturing life through hardship, about transforming the raw elements of earth fire and will into a sanctuary. And she is the heart of that sanctuary. The morning sun filters through the smoke-stained window, casting soft golden hues across the longhouse. You sense the rhythm of the day already settling around you. She's moved beyond survival mode into something more nuanced today: education. Yes, schooling, Viking style. But don't picture little desks or chalkboards. Instead, it's a lively blend of storytelling, practical skills, and lessons in law and loyalty. You watch her gather the children, her own, neighbors, and sometimes those from further away, all circling near the fire. Their faces are bright with curiosity and the hint of mischief. She begins with a story, weaving together the past and the present, heroes and mistakes, morality and consequence. These tales aren't just for entertainment. They're the fabric of society, lessons wrapped in adventure, warnings disguised as drama. She's passing down history through voice and gesture, preparing them for the realities of Viking life. Historians still argue whether formal education was common among Viking children, especially girls. Some evidence suggests girls learned domestic crafts and social skills at home, while boys might have had more exposure to fighting and navigation. But everyone agreed that oral tradition was a vital educational tool, something she commands with practice skill. After the stories, she shifts to skills training. You see her demonstrate spinning wool, her fingers nimble as they twist flax into thread. Then she teaches the girls how to sew and mend, passing down techniques that can mean the difference between warmth and exposure, between respect and neglect. But there's more to this than stitches and thread. She talks about the importance of patience, attention to detail, and pride in one's work. Your needle is your sword, she says, a smile tugging at her lips. Wield it well. You catch a glimpse of the boys learning knot tying and wood carving nearby, their hands fumbling but eager. She oversees quietly, stepping in with encouragement or correction when needed. There's an unexpected moment when a small boy struggles to carve a simple animal figure. She kneels beside him, guiding his hand. Steady, she whispers. Every line counts. It's a reminder that leadership is patient, tender even. Quirky note: Viking children sometimes played with small wooden toys and carved figures, which weren't just amusements but tools for imagination and learning. Archaeologists have found miniature shields, boats, and even animals. Some scholars debate if these were gendered toys or more universal, but either way, they served as early lessons in culture and craft. Later, she gathers the older girls to teach about household management, how to plan meals, store supplies, and maintain order in the longhouse. She stresses the importance of balance: not too much, not too little, always enough. You'll be the heart and the brain of your home one day, she tells them firmly. Don't forget it. Her teachings aren't just about skills, they're about identity and empowerment. She prepares these young women to run households that can withstand storms, to negotiate trade, to mediate disputes, and yes, to nurture families. As the sun sets, you see the children disperse, sleepy but satisfied. The quiet that follows is filled with a deep sense of continuity. The future is being forged here, shaped by stories and stitches in steady hands. You think about your own lessons, how different yet how similar they are. And you realize she's not just preserving tradition, she's shaping it. Because running a Viking household isn't a static role. It's a living, breathing legacy. The sun leans low, the sky a painter's wash of orange and pink as you step outside. The air is sharp, but carries the promise of evening warmth. Tonight, the Longhouse isn't just a shelter, it's a stage for power and politics. Because while she rules the hearth, she also commands the extended family and the wider clan, juggling relationships like a seasoned diplomat. You watch as neighbors begin to arrive, their footsteps crunching on the frozen earth, bundles in hand, eyes scanning for familiar faces. The gathering is informal but charged with expectation. This is the assembly, the place where alliances are forged, grievances aired, and decisions made. She is at the center, not just as a hostess, but as a leader. She moves with the assured grace of someone who knows every face, every story, every fault line. You see the way people lean in when she speaks, respect mixed with a dash of deference. She doesn't shout or demand. Instead, she listens, nods, and responds with measured words. It's a subtle power that keeps the peace. Historians still debate how much political influence Viking women wielded in public assemblies called things. Some sagas depict women advising chieftains or even ruling in their own right, while others suggest their roles were confined to domestic spheres. But it's clear women like her were key players in clan dynamics. wielding soft power with sharp insight. Tonight, she mediates a dispute between two farmers over grazing rights. You catch her quiet interventions, reminding one party of past favors, appealing to shared interests, suggesting compromises. Her words are gentle but firm, weaving a solution from tension and stubbornness. Meanwhile, a group of younger men exchange news from afar, rumors of distant raids, the latest shipbuilding techniques, even whispers of new trade opportunities. She listens with a knowing smile, her mind cataloging possibilities and threats alike. Quirky fact: some Viking women were known to wear shield rings or armbands, not just as decoration, but as symbols of their clan's status and political influence. One tale tells of a woman who used her shield ring to call a meeting, asserting her authority. Historians still argue the extent of such symbols' real-world power versus their mythic role. As the evening deepens, she shares food and drink, smoked meats, dark bread, honeyed mead, breaking bread as a gesture of trust and community. The longhouse hums with stories, laughter, and the occasional heated debate, all under her watchful eye. You notice how she balances firmness with kindness, authority with approachability. It's a delicate dance, mastering clan politics without losing the household's heart. At one point, an elderly woman seeks her counsel on a personal matter, a dispute over inheritance. She listens attentively, then offers advice rooted in tradition and practicality. The elder's eyes soften, and a nod seals the moment. By night's end, alliances have shifted, agreements reached, and tensions eased. She stands near the fire, tired but satisfied, the weight of responsibility settled like a mantle on her shoulders. You realize that her household is more than a family unit. It's a political hub, a network of power woven with threads of trust and respect. And she is the master weaver. The morning light spills gently over the fields, softening the frost-covered grass into a silvery carpet. You step out beside her, feeling the crunch beneath your boots as she leads you toward the outbuildings. Today's lesson is one of craftsmanship and industry, how Viking women weren't just homemakers but skilled artisans, vital to the economy of their households. You watch as she approaches the spinning wheel, its wooden spokes worn smooth by years of use. With practiced fingers, she begins to spin wool into yarn, her movements rhythmic and fluid. The sound is hypnotic, the gentle creak of wood, the soft whisper of fiber twisting into thread. She explains how spinning was more than a chore. It was an art form, a way to ensure warmth and status. Quality yarn meant better clothing, stronger sails, finer nets. The household's survival depended on the quality of her work. Interestingly, archaeological finds from Viking settlements reveal beautifully crafted textiles and spinning tools, some ornately decorated, suggesting pride and skill when hand in hand. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking women engaged in trade themselves, or if they worked mainly to supply male traders and warriors. But what's clear is that their craftsmanship was essential. Next, she guides you to the loom, where fabric slowly takes shape under her touch. Weaving is a careful balance of patience and precision. Each thread interlaces with another, creating patterns that tell stories or denote status. She mentions that certain patterns were reserved for special occasions or ranks within the community, a kind of textile language. Your weaving speaks for you, she says, eyes gleaming with pride. Quirky fact: some Viking textiles show evidence of dyeing with exotic plants, including woad and madder, which produced brilliant blues and reds, colors rare and expensive in that era. Some historians still argue whether these dyes were accessible to most households or only to the elite. Her hands move confidently, weaving as she talks about the role of trade in Viking society. Wool, flax, and finished cloth were valuable goods that women helped produce and sometimes even barter. It wasn't just about keeping warm. It was about maintaining status and wealth. Later, she shows you a basket filled with tools, needles, awls, scissors made from bone and metal. She teaches you how to make simple repairs, mending torn cloaks or patching sails. A stitch in time saves a long voyage, she jokes softly. You watch her work, feeling the connection between the rhythm of her fingers and the pulse of the household economy. This is a dance of industry and creativity, a subtle but powerful force shaping Viking life. Before the day ends, she pulls out a small wooden box filled with charms and amulets, many crafted from bone or carved wood. She explains their significance: protections for the wearer, blessings for the household, symbols of faith and fate. These artifacts are a curious mix of pagan tradition and emerging Christian influences, reflecting a culture in transition. Historians still debate how deeply women's religious roles shaped daily life, but these charms suggest a deeply spiritual dimension to their work. You realize that Viking women's craftsmanship wasn't just about making things, it was about weaving together culture, economy, and identity. And she is the artisan at the center of it all. Dusk falls again, cool and quiet, wrapping the longhouse in shadows that flicker with the hearth's amber glow. Tonight, you follow her into a more private world, one where her influence stretches into matters of law, honor, and even spirituality. The household is a microcosm of Viking society, and she is both judge and priestess in its daily rituals. She begins by recounting how disputes within the family or with neighbors often landed on her judgment. In a culture famed for its fierce independence, peacekeeping was a subtle art. You don't win by force, she says softly, but by wisdom and patience. Her voice is calm, almost hypnotic, weaving through the space like the smoke curling above the fire. You hear stories of how she mediates conflicts over land, inheritance, or marriages, balancing traditions with practicality. Her rulings don't come from power alone, but from the respect she commands, built over years of steady leadership. Historians still argue how much legal authority Viking women truly held, especially in public courts versus private disputes. Some sagas speak of women acting as arbiters and witnesses, while archaeological evidence hints at women signing legal contracts, a radical concept in its time. Quirky tidbit: certain Viking laws allowed women to divorce and reclaim their dowries, a notable contrast to other medieval societies where women's rights were minimal. Yet, the process was complex, often requiring proof and negotiation, reflecting a legal system where women's roles were both empowered and constrained. She moves on to spirituality, explaining how the household maintained sacred rituals, offerings to the hearth goddess, blessings for safe travels, prayers for fertility and protection. These weren't grand ceremonies but intimate moments that bound the family to their gods and each other. You notice small symbols around the room, carvings of Thor's hammer, woven runes, bowls for libations. She tells you about the blend of pagan beliefs and the creeping influence of Christianity, a spiritual landscape as complex as the politics you've seen. The rituals serve as a reminder that the household is more than bricks and timber. It's a living organism connected to unseen forces. She is its guardian, interpreter, and guide. Later, she shares a quiet moment with you, reflecting on the challenges of balancing tradition and change. Our world is shifting, she admits, but the hearth must stay steady. You feel the weight of that responsibility settle between you, a shared understanding of resilience in the face of uncertainty. The night deepens, and with it, a sense of reverence for her role, not just as a keeper of the household, but as a pillar of law and faith. She is the heart, mind, and spirit of her world. The first light of dawn filters softly through the smoky window once more, signaling the close of your journey alongside her. Today feels like a gentle breath, a moment of stillness as you consider everything she has been and done. The woman who ran the Viking household with quiet authority and fierce love. You realize that her role was never static. She was navigator, warrior, educator, diplomat, artisan, judge, and priestess, all rolled into one steady figure holding the household steady against the chaos of Viking life. Every day brought new challenges, new stories, and through it all, she moved with a calm resolve that anchored everyone around her. You remember the way she spun wool into yarn, telling stories beside the fire, how she managed the politics of the clan, smoothing tensions without drawing a sword. Her hands, stained with dye and soot, crafting beauty and utility alike. Her voice, calm and commanding, weaving laws and prayers that held the household's spirit intact. Historians still argue about how much of her influence was acknowledged in official records, given the male-centered sagas and chronicles. Yet, the evidence is clear. Her power was real, vital, and complex. Quirky detail: some Viking women were buried with keys to the household storerooms, symbolizing their authority over the home's resources. This simple object was a potent emblem of trust and responsibility. As you take a final look around the longhouse, the echoes of her presence linger, a tapestry of smells, sounds, and textures that tell a story of resilience and grace. You think about the long nights, the hard work, the laughter, and the tears. You think about how, beneath the helmets and swords of Viking warriors, there was a world run by women like her. The world might remember the battles and the ships, But the heartbeat of Viking life was in the longhouse, under her care. And as you prepare to leave this world behind, you carry with you a quiet admiration for the woman who was, quite simply, the captain of her own ship. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the day's thoughts start to blur, let the pace slow even more. Imagine the longhouse now quiet, the fire's glow softening to embers. The air cools, carrying faint scents of wood smoke and dried herbs, wrapping you in a gentle embrace. Each breath deepens your calm, your muscles releasing tension as you sink further into comfort. Picture the steady rhythm of a distant river, flowing endlessly and calmly, much like the steady life she led. Her story fades into a gentle whisper, blending with the rustle of leaves and the hum of the night wind. No urgency, no questions, just the warm, constant pulse of home. You might feel the weight of the day lifting, replaced by the soothing quiet of history's soft embrace. The world outside recedes, and here, in this space, all is safe and still. The flicker of the hearth's memory lulls your mind into gentle waves of restfulness. Let your thoughts drift like the smoke rising through the chimney, light and free, untethered by time or worry. Imagine her resting too, a small smile on her lips, knowing that her legacy carries on quietly in the hearts of those who listen. Now, slowly, begin to surrender to sleep, knowing you've traveled far and learned much without leaving your place. The longhouse stands strong, the story settles, and your own journey into dreams begins. Good night and sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.